President Trump and the First Lady both tested positive for the CCP virus. A China analyst says this might prompt him to take an even tougher line against threats posed by the CCP when he recovers. A text alert once again brings attention to China's potential food crisis, and there are other worrying signs. Crowds at tourist spots across China are raising concern. This as virus cases continue to rise. Chinese citizens talk about makeshift hospitals for combating the CCP virus that local media don't report on. The Chinese Communist Party is responsible for the murder of millions of baby girls through brutal forms of population control with the support from UN agencies. This, according to the U.S. Education Secretary. And top Chinese swimmers failed in qualifying rounds for Olympic-level swimming. It was due to their poor scores in physical fitness tests, like long-distance running. This is the result of an odd political move. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Trump joined the growing list of world leaders infected by the CCP virus. A China analyst says this may prompt him to take an even tougher line against threats posed by the CCP when he has recovered.
China analyst Tang Jingyuan says the news might prompt U.S. President Trump to take an even harder approach towards the Chinese regime.
As the U.S. president, he's supposed to have the highest level of security and protection, but even he can't get away from the virus. From one side, it shows that the threat that the CCP has brought to the world is far beyond people's imagination.
In May, the Trump administration issued a new report detailing its strategic approach to China. The report criticized the past U.S. engagement policy towards the CCP. It also condemned China's actions on trade and other issues. But it also states that U.S. policies are not premised on an attempt to change the PRC's or People's Republic of China's domestic governance model.
In the past, Trump's attitude towards the Chinese Communist Party was still somewhat limited, in the sense that he could coexist with it, because the approach he adopted was mainly the reciprocal strategy, which means if you treat me better, I can also treat you better. This is also reflected in Trump's behavior. For example, his treatment of trade agreements. The trade agreement between him and the CCP is still important. He is more reluctant to part with it. Although we all know, anyone who understands the nature of the CCP knows that this trade agreement is only a tactic used to delay. On the other hand, on the Hong Kong issue, we can see that he seldom speaks out publicly on human rights issues in Hong Kong. And even when he signed the Hong Kong bill, he signed it later. His attitude shows that he still has some reservations towards the CCP and Xi Jinping.
This week, the House GOP's China Task Force published a new report. It suggests 400 recommendations for the U.S. to counter threats by the CCP. The first on the list, for the White House to clearly and publicly state the intention to break the Chinese regime's totalitarianism. It says America's goal must not be indefinite coexistence with a hostile communist state, but rather the end of the party's monopoly on power. All policies should flow from this North Star.
Anti-communist and eliminating communism, these are two different stages. Anti-communist allows coexistence with the CCP. But eliminating communism is not the same. It's a life and death battle.
President Trump has recently joined the ranks of world leaders who have been infected with the CCP virus. The first being British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who has since made a U-turn in his China policy. Previously China-friendly, he now embraces a tough stance on the regime. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
Across the globe, top leaders sent messages of support to U.S. President Donald Trump and his wife Melania after it was revealed the two have tested positive for COVID-19. Russian President Vladimir Putin sent a message of encouragement to the U.S. president. And Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wished the couple to, quote, get well soon and have a full recovery from this virus. The Prime Minister of India and one of Trump's closest allies, Narendra Modi, also sent well wishes to Trump. Other leaders from around the world sent in their wishes on Twitter, representing countries in Europe, Asia, and Africa. The White House said that Trump has mild symptoms of coronavirus, but he was expected to remain on the job.
Following the headline news that President Trump and the First Lady tested positive for the virus, Chinese social media blew up. Many expressed glee, saying it was a National Day gift from the U.S. October 1st kicks off the anniversary of the Chinese regime taking power in 1949. Part of the glee came from the fact that under U.S. law, if the president is unable to perform his duties, his successors would be Vice President Mike Pence, then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. But that glee might be misplaced. Both Pence and Pelosi are known for their hard stance on China. Both spoke at the ministerial to advance religious freedom last July. They agreed China must be held accountable for its escalating widespread and undue restrictions on religious freedom. It was a rare moment of true bipartisanship.
What's happening in China is a challenge to the conscience of the world, and we cannot let it go.
Recently, another bipartisan issue was on Huawei. Pelosi has repeatedly warned U.S. allies against doing business with Huawei. She called it the most insidious form of aggression. In February this year, she warned against the Chinese regime. Pelosi has a history of standing against human rights abuses happening in China. In 1991, she was expelled from China for holding up a banner in Tiananmen Square. She issued a statement in June 2020 marking the 31st anniversary of the massacre. She said for 3 decades, the U.S. has been united against human rights abuses in China. Pelosi has also been a vocal supporter of the pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. She urged the White House to pass the Hong Kong Pro-Democracy Act. Likewise, Vice President Mike Pence is also known for his hardline stance on China. In his 2018 speech at the Washington, D.C.-based think tank Hudson Institute, Pence accused the Chinese regime of meddling in American politics. He noted the Chinese regime's pressure on the international community to sever ties with Taiwan. Pence said America will always believe that Taiwan's embrace of democracy shows a better path for all the Chinese people. He also criticized the Communist Party's aggressive militarization in the contested waters of the South China Sea, as well as its practice of taking advantage of developing countries by using debt diplomacy. And last year, Pence again criticized the One China policy. He warned the U.S. was strongly against Beijing's rising aggression in the South China Sea, and he also voiced support for Hong Kong pro-democracy protesters, while criticizing Beijing's human rights violations in Tibet and Xinjiang. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said on Friday he would go ahead with a trip to Asia next week. This after President Trump tested positive for the CCP virus. According to the top U.S. diplomat for East Asia, David Stilwell, Pompeo's visit to Japan, South Korea, and Mongolia next week demonstrates the U.S.'s strong commitment to its allies in the region. Japan is one of the U.S.'s most important allies in the region, and the country was the most advanced technology in Asia. South Korea has been facing North Korea's nuclear threat for decades. The communist regime in Beijing is the most important partner of North Korea. Mongolia is bordered with the Inner Mongolia region ruled by China. The suppression of Mongolian culture by the Chinese Communist Party intensified over the last month. People in Mongolia share the same culture as those of the Inner Mongolia region. During his visit to Asia, Pompeo will join a meeting to promote a 4-nation Quad framework between the U.S., Japan, Australia, and India. This move is widely regarded as an attempt to counter China's growing influence. Cases of CCP virus continue to rise in China. But with the country's week-long National Day holiday in full swing, crowds of tourists are gathering and travel has surged. Concerns are rising over the potential for more infection.
Over the National Day holiday week, it's estimated that 550 million people will travel across China to visit family and travel. That's about 70% of last year. The holiday started Thursday. A large number of tourists appeared on the Great Wall in Beijing. A video showed that the highest point of the Great Wall was crowded with people. However, this video was deleted by local media later on in the day. Many popular tourist attractions across China were facing the same situation. People going there were stuck on the roads, at times for up to 9 hours. Railway stations were also crowded with people. Mr. Wei, a citizen of Hangzhou in eastern China, said authorities announced success over combating the pandemic, which led to people relaxing and being off their guard.
Westlake has been very crowded, including the streets in the city. I am very worried because this is the most dangerous time. There are fewer people wearing masks. It is very relaxed.
He criticized the government for covering up the true situation.
The information is blocked. Many places in our country have built makeshift hospitals, but the government won't tell you. The media won't report it at all. Instead, they say everything is fine.
Mr. Lin, a citizen of Changchun City in northeast China, believes that the economic aspect was the reason for reopening the tourist attractions.
In the week of this year's National Day holiday, the government sent people out to travel. I found that the reason is the economy is going down, and the pressure is relatively high. They want more money and the fiscal revenue. But the risk is really very big. During the May Day holiday, some people went out and brought the epidemic to our Jilin province, and several areas were put under lockdown again. After the long holiday of National Day, when people return to work, they will definitely bring the epidemic to every region.
However, not all locations are popular. Hotel businesses and vendors are deserted. Reporting by Xiong Bing and Chen Jie, NTD News.
Concerns are rising over China's food security. This comes as authorities in a major grain-growing region are asking residents to stock up on grain supplies. NTD's Juliet Song has the story.
China's potential food crisis is once again taking center stage, thanks to a text message alert. Residents in China's southwest Sichuan province received a text message on Tuesday. In it is a news report about authorities asking locals to stock up on grain. It's triggered concerns over China's food security. That's because Sichuan is one of the nation's major grain supply regions. Other grain-growing areas are also suffering. Almost half of China's largest agricultural regions are in the south and were hit hard by the heavy flooding this year. On top of that, farmlands also suffered heavy losses from drought and locust infestations. Despite the natural disasters, China's agriculture minister claims the country will see a bumper harvest this year. But Chinese farmers say they're not convinced. A farmer from China's northeast Shandong province said he believes the true situation is much different.
I think there could be a problem with the grain supply this year, because my hometown is a crop production area, and it has seen a drop in production due to flooding.
And there are other worrying signs. In July, while southern and central China suffered from the worst flooding in decades, Communist Party head Xi Jinping visited Jilin province in northern China, another important grain-growing area. Xi asked local officials to prioritize securing food supplies. In August, authorities saw a drop in wheat purchases in 5 major agricultural areas, while the price of staples like corn, wheat, and rice increased. Around the same time, Xi Jinping also urged Chinese citizens to not waste food and remain alert to food security issues. And in September, one of the country's vice premiers, Hu Chenhua, went to inspect China's top grain-growing area. He said the fall harvest accounts for 70% of annual grain production and urged local officials to harvest as much grain as possible. Juliet Song, NTD News.
Now we look to China's aspiring Olympians ahead of the Tokyo Olympic Games. During China's qualifying rounds for Olympic-level swimming, some famous athletes failed to make the cut, despite receiving excellent scores in swimming. Some of them had even won Olympic medals in previous years. Reportedly, their rejections came after they scored poorly in physical fitness tests, like long-distance running. But swimmers weren't the only ones affected. Badminton players, track and field athletes, fencers, and even chess players were also required to take the physical fitness tests. Because of the regulation, 2 women's fencing world champions were cut from the competition during the early stages of the qualifying competition. Another athlete who placed 3rd for the men's triple jump at the last Olympics also didn't make the cut. Though, on the other hand, the athlete with the worst qualifying score from the National Gymnastics Championships ended up in 5th place. That's due to receiving a good score during the physical fitness tests. Surprisingly, the odd fitness test regulation actually has its roots in politics. It was imposed back in February. That's when China's General Sports Administration announced a notice on further strengthening basic physical training. The new guideline requires athletes to achieve the goal of zero doping cases for the Tokyo Olympics. The notice also asserted that only by focusing on physical training can the anti-doping target be achieved. But due to the task's political nature, top athletes who suffered because of it dare not speak up. Otherwise, they'd likely be accused of lacking loyalty toward the Chinese Communist Party or CCP. They may also face criticism for considering the competition as the first priority, while labeling dedication for the party as the second. Athletes who face political backlash will also lose all opportunity to travel abroad to compete. The U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee is calling for U.S.-Taiwan trade agreements. In a statement, Chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee Jim Risch urged U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer to establish formal trade relations with Taiwan. 49 senators are backing him, a strong show of bipartisanship. Risch said on Twitter, Taiwan is an important partner of the U.S. and a model democracy in the Indo-Pacific. The senators wrote in the statement, Taiwan would be an asset in advancing the initiative for a free and open Indo-Pacific, adding they were confident such an agreement would promote security and economic growth for the United States, Taiwan, and the Indo-Pacific as a whole. Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs thanked all 50 senators for their support. U.S. State Department spokesperson Morgan Ortagus regularly posts records of the Chinese Communist Party's intimidation and persecution of Western media journalists. She shared 10 of them online as of October 1st. On September 22nd, she quoted the story of Australian reporter Matthew Carney. The communist regime has denounced Carney's report on China's Xinjiang region and CCP leaders. In retaliation, Chinese officials threatened to detain his 14-year-old daughter. Ortega says the CCP's disturbing behavior against investigative journalists goes back years. She asserts that Beijing must stop its harassment of China-based foreign reporters. The 10 tweets she's posted so far cover cases where Beijing either expelled reporters or canceled their visas. Her posts also mention how regime officials harass and interfere with reporters' interviews. Beijing even blocked Bloomberg when it reported on Communist Party head Xi Jinping and his extended family's wealth. Ortega also notes that reporters from the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Agence France Presse, and American online media company BuzzFeed were either unable to get Chinese visas or expelled. They were blocked after reporting on taboo subjects like the Communist Party's infiltration in Western countries, hostility toward press freedoms, and persecution of the Uyghur ethnic group in Xinjiang. For example, 3 Wall Street Journal reporters published extensive coverage of the CCP's human rights abuses. Beijing expelled them soon after in February, but it claimed it was due to their publication of an opinion-based article. In reality, the article was written by a professor from Bard College, and the 3 journalists were not involved. Reporters from VOA, HuffPost, and CNN also report harassment from Chinese police. Some have even been detained after trying to report on protests or interview dissidents. On September 28th, Ortega wrote on Twitter, "The People's Republic of China rarely respects press freedom, restricting access for reporters, intimidating sources, and monitoring journalistic electronic devices. The deterioration has been happening for years." World leaders took part in a virtual UN General Assembly meeting on Thursday. It was to commemorate the 1995 Women's Conference in Beijing. But U.S. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos called out the Chinese regime for its treatment of women and girls.
The worst violator of all, in both scope and scale, is the host of the conference we commemorate today. Since 1995, the Chinese Communist Party has been responsible for the murder of millions of baby girls through brutal population controls on an industrial scale, unfortunately with the support from UN agencies.
During a face-to-face EU summit in Brussels, German Chancellor Angela Merkel called out China on Friday. She stated that any investment agreement between China and the European Union must involve reciprocity, adding that European companies should enjoy the same freedoms to invest in China as Chinese businesses do in Europe. She also noted that if the Chinese side gives no market access in certain areas, that will naturally mean that access to the European market will also be more restricted. It's the second time this week that Merkel voiced a hard stance on the Chinese Communist Party. On Wednesday, she accused the Chinese Communist regime for what she called its poor and cruel treatment of minorities in China, and expressed deep concerns over the crackdown on dissent in Hong Kong. A new report says UK telecoms had to take extraordinary action last year after Huawei's kit posed a threat to UK security.
A vulnerability of national significance was discovered in Huawei's broadband gear. Britain's National Cybersecurity Centre, or NCSC, forced Huawei to rewrite the code and security before it could be exploited. But Huawei's attempt to fix the problem created a separate major issue in the system. With enough knowledge and access, an attacker can gain entry to user traffic and even reconfigure network elements. The US government has repeatedly warned that allowing Huawei into UK networks risks giving Beijing a backdoor to spy on British communication.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you next time.